That was Jim Savarino doing Wherever the Mountains Gone. Jim was a guest here on Acoustic Songs Live in the studio. If you have a chance to check it out, you can go to youtube.com/Acoustic Songs Live and view the show. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bob East here with Ron Gulla to talk about Earth Talk.
I want to thank you, Mitch, for letting us be part of your show today. This is a bicentennial special. Earth Talk, as our listeners know, normally runs Fridays from 1 till 2 p.m. during the regular school year. But this is a special opportunity. The past, the present, and the future of this lovely area that we call home, that I've called home for the last 10 years, in the employment of Washington and Jefferson College, Director of Environmental Studies. And I was given the opportunity to participate, and one gentleman who I've had the pleasure to know just recently through second and third parties is Mr. Ron Gulla. And Mr. Gulla has become quite a figure, probably not of his own wishes, but has become quite a figure in the issue of Marcellus Shale development. And some would say this is definitely part of the present. It's linked to our past, and it's probably going to be part of our future. Now, how long it's going to be part of our future, I've heard years, I've heard decades. I haven't, when's the gas going to run out? What happens when the gas runs out? These are issues which our listeners will have noticed that I've covered in previous shows. This past semester, we had some folks from Penn Future on here, Range Resources. We had Mike Rush, one of our illustrious graduates, who did a very nice capstone study on the Marcellus Shale development, the economics of it. So I like to think that Earth Talk has really covered extensively, but not exhaustively, issues dealing with Marcellus Shale. So Mr. Gulla has been gracious enough on short notice, again, to come into the studio. Mr. Gulla, I'd like to welcome you to WJ Campus and to Earth Talk specifically.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to give you a lot of free rein here to tell us your experiences with Marcellus Shale. And just as a footnote to this whole conversation, there are people who I know and who I could not get into the studio who have not had a bad experience with gas development. Just for complete honesty, they're happy with the money they've got. There are students at this college who are here on tuition paid from royalties from their gas development. Now, does that mean that they won't have problems in the future with their wells, with their springs? It's possible. But there are people quite happy with what they're getting, at least financially, from the gas development. So let's just be honest. There's some economic benefits, but as with anything that we're extracting from the earth, any natural resource, sometimes there are long-term consequences that we won't see even in our lifetime. And I'll give our listeners a brief example. There's an analog here with what's happening in the Gulf oil spill and what happened with the Exxon Valdez spill back in when was it, the late 80s. What happens typically is some of these insults to the environment take years to sort of play out. An ecosystem exists at some form of equilibrium, at some carrying capacity. For instance, the herring and the shellfish population has never recovered back to the point that it was. That ecosystem up there has actually created a new stable equilibrium, but at a lower carrying capacity. Now, what does that mean for people there? They don't get as much herring and shellfish. The ecosystem has recovered to some extent, but it can't produce as much. The net primary production and the food web is not as robust, and it's not as complicated as it used to be. The oil spill simplified the food web. Now, there are those that argue that anytime we release abandoned mine drainage or fracking fluid or any of these toxic chemicals into the environment, the same thing will happen. That it takes time for nature to recover, and it will recover, but at some form of a new equilibrium point. And the equilibrium point typically is lower productivity. We don't get the same amount of resources in the same quality of resources that we once got. This is ecological theory, and I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to digress into an ecological program. I wanted to put a human face, a human testimony to issues with Marcellus Shale. So, Mr. Gulla, could you tell us, after that heavy preface there, I'm sorry, my ecological bias sort of bled through there, but having heard this preface, short-term gains versus long-term consequences, could you tell us, first of all, how did you get connected to the Marcellus Shale gas extraction?
First of all, no one knew they were drilling for Marcellus Shale. They basically told the public it was the Trenton Black River. Majority of people thought shallow wells.
How many years ago when you
'02,
actually
it
began in '02?
Well, that's when I signed a lease, but they actually started in and around '01 and started approaching people. An individual out of Harrisburg was running around who works for the Game Commission, was trying to gather leases, and of course they go and they grab somebody from the Farm Bureau, so that that way if you've got someone from the Farm Bureau, it makes it a little easier to approach the farmers, because they figure, oh, well, they have they know the man, so you know he's going to help you, not hurt you. But no one actually knew what they were getting into. No one knew how big this was going to be. No one knew how obtrusive it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And again, everyone thought a vertical well and free gas. They also told us in the lease it stipulated 300,000 cubic feet of gas a year free. So that was a hook. And naturally, that's all we were looking for. And that was the only reason why I signed the lease. And I was one of the last ones to sign, because I didn't feel right about it. It was a 7-year lease. I didn't like about, when I did find out about this fellow working for the Game Commission, that bothered me. And I didn't know that until after I signed the lease, because I didn't sign it with him, I signed it with the gal from Great Lakes.
Okay, now you are, I should have sort of led you into this better, and I apologize, but you reside in Washington County, in which township or which municipality?
Hickory, which is
Hickory.
ground zero
Yes.
for the Marcellus Shale, and I happened to be the second well drilled, and I didn't even know they were doing a horizontal well.
This is what I wanted to ask, because you took us all the way back to 2003, but I'm willing to bet that most of the attention that's been brought from Marcellus Shale is very recent. I mean, most of what I'm reading in the news, seeing on the television, hearing in public discussions, has really come about, is it fair to say, in the last year or two?
That's correct. In the last year, it has snowballed because of the information that's getting out there now and the problems that are occurring, that have occurred, and information is more readily available to the people. A lot more on the internet, and people are educating themselves. And a lot of people have told me, well, you did this for the money. No, I didn't do it for the money. I got $7.50 an acre. The individual that gathered these leases, he got us $8.25. He took 75 cents for himself, so we ended up with $7.50. He got us 14% royalty. He gets 0.5% of the royalty. He's your middleman. You call him for help. Any problems you have, well, when you call him, see what he would do for you if he returned a phone call. A lot of my neighbors had issues. He would never return a phone call. He had you. You know, they got you. And once they got you, what do? Now you have to go retain an attorney. And a lot of the folks don't have money to retain attorneys. They don't want to get into that struggle and that hassle and all that stress which comes with it. And that's what this has done to a lot of people. There are people that are happy. I agree. There are a lot of people that are not happy, because now they've been into it for 5 years. And now they see how this game is working. A lot of people are upset because of now the production costs. They charge for transporting it, for drying it, and storing it. And they take out all the different byproducts from the condensate, propane, butane, hexane, etc. And a farmer gets nothing for that. So in other words, say if you get 14% royalty, in reality you're only ending up at maybe 7.
So when you initially signed your lease, how much time elapsed before you really started to become disenchanted? And what were the signs along the way that made you think, uh-oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be?
Immediately, as soon as they started cutting a location road in, I just went ballistic. I showed the fella 3 times where to put the road. I mowed it with a 10-foot brush hog. I came home from work, they put the road exactly where I didn't want it. As soon as you move dirt, you have to control water.
Oh, sure.
Because naturally, you're changing the contour of the land. Then they brought in over 20 triaxle loads of mill slag. I don't want mill slag on my property, and this road is directly above my house. It's directly above my water well. Where do you think all this runoff is going?
Now I always thought that, and I know this because I study some of the regulations, isn't it illegal to keep a construction site unstabilized or keep soil bare for like more than 7 days or something like that? The DEP is supposed to enforce that. But you're saying that there were just, well, yeah, I know, I'm sort of like